This happened quite a few years ago when I was a relatively young and a sheltered high school student, probably about 15 years old. Some of my close girlfriends and I decided to go to the drive-in movie theater one night where they showed two movies in a row, and the whole thing ended pretty late at night, probably around 1 a.m. or so. The five of us all drove in my friend Aaron's car. As we were putting the seats down and setting up the back of the car with blankets and pillows, Erin recognized a guy, David, whom she had met a few times because he worked at her gym. He was at the drive-in alone, which wasn't necessarily weird, just not something many people did in my town. He came over to our car to chit-chat. Immediately, one of my other friends, Kareen, took a liking to this guy and began flirting up a storm. It wasn't long before she invited him to watch the movie with us inside Aaron's car. Soon after, David offered us, a group of 15 to 17-year-olds, alcohol, which we accepted. Looking back now, that's a huge red flag. I was wary of this David character as he appeared a lot older than us, maybe in his mid-20s, and gave me a weird vibe. But since Aaron seemed to know him and my friends weren't acting alarmed, I didn't give it too much thought. We weren't even 15 minutes into the movie, and I was too uncomfortable to be enjoying myself. 6 people were crammed into the back of one car, with Kareen and David cuddling and flirting beneath the blankets. It made me want to get out of there as soon as possible. When David suggested that my 3 remaining friends and I could watch the movie in his car while he stayed in Aaron's car with Kareen, I jumped at the offer. David's car was a small sedan with little room, so we had to sit in the seats normally, as if we were about to ride in the car. Although I was a little uncomfortable sitting in the driver's seat with the steering wheel between me and the screen, I was glad to finally have some personal space. That all changed when I dropped my phone, and it landed somewhere underneath the driver's seat. While blindly reaching underneath to find my phone, I grabbed onto a hard object that was a lot heavier than my phone. As I began to lift it up, to my complete and utter surprise, I realized it was a gun. I'd never seen a real-life gun before at that point in my life, so it could have been fake, a BB gun or whatever else. But it looked real, felt real, and was hidden underneath the driver's seat for easy access. It freaked me out because, even if it was a fake gun, what could he be intending to use it for besides intimidation? For whatever reasons, my friends didn't find this as startling as I did, and they managed to calm me down. They concluded that the best thing to do was to just put it back underneath the seat where I found it. That was fine with me, as I didn't plan on ever being in this car again once the movie was over, and I definitely didn't plan on being in the car when David was in it ever again. The rest of the 2 movies went by fine. We were drinking the beer that David had so kindly provided to us, and I guess having a fun time. It was late by the time the second movie ended, and I was ready to get back to our friend Erica's house, where we were sleeping for the night. I hopped out of David's car, ready to get back into Aaron's car, when I saw Aaron's car already driving away. Kareen popped up and cheerfully announced that David had offered to drive us home. How nice of him, right? Having no other way to get home, and being slightly intoxicated, I watched the rest of my friends pile into the car. I followed suit, even though I had my hesitations. David sat in the driver's seat, I sat behind David, and Ken sat shotgun, beginning to play her signature Justin Bieber playlist through the speakers. The car ride started out normal enough, with Erica giving directions to her house, Kareen not paying attention to anything but her Justin Bieber music, and me feeling uneasy and hyper-aware of the situation. As we approached Erica's house, David asked us if we had time to take a quick drive up to the reservoir, which was located on the outskirts of town, very isolated and surrounded by heavily wooded areas. It was probably close to 2 a.m. at this point, and the only person who slightly knew this random man had left us. I knew there was a very real-looking gun underneath the seat of this guy's car that he didn't know I knew about, so I just said no. David just said, "We're going up to the reservoir." Confused and alarmed, I started politely protesting, saying we really didn't have time and that we were expected to be home. But with every word I said, David turned the volume of the music up louder and louder. drowning out my voice and obviously ignoring me. He started to head up the long, dark road that leads to the reservoir. I went into panic mode and was annoyed that none of my friends were doing anything, especially Corrine, who was still singing along to the songs. At that point, I started to freak out. I decided that he couldn't take us up to the reservoir. He just couldn't. What if the gun was real and he threatened us with it? Or even if the gun wasn't real, but he still used it to threaten us? A million thoughts raced through my head. I wouldn't let him take us out into a secluded area where any number of things could happen and no one could hear us. I decided if he was going to do something to us, I would rather risk it being here in town on a more populated road where our chances of survival were better. So I literally freaked out. All the sense of politeness I felt I needed to have was gone. I started kicking the back of his chair with both of my feet, screaming at the top of my lungs that he needed to take us back now. I rolled down the window and started shouting, trying to cause a scene, doing anything I could to try to stop this man from driving us up to the middle of nowhere. I didn't stop kicking and screaming until he relented, almost scoffing and saying, "Fine," as if I was some crazy lady completely overreacting to the situation. But I didn't care what he thought. I was just relieved that he had turned the car around and was actually taking us back to Erica's house. Once we got there, I ran out of the car. We woke up Erica's parents to let them know what had happened, since this guy now had one of our addresses. I didn't sleep that whole night, and my friendship with Corrine was damaged from her putting me in such a terrifying situation just because she had the hots for this guy. Before we move on to the next story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something similar? If so, please share your experience in the comments section. I read all your comments and try to reply to everyone. Additionally, I will feature some of your experiences in my next videos. While at the movies, I decided to go to the bathroom before the film started, just after the trailers had finished. I had bought and thirstily consumed a large slushie and had no confidence in my sensitive bladder surviving the 2.5-hour experience. When I entered the bathroom, it was empty. All the stall doors were open and the spaces within were unoccupied. There wasn't anywhere for someone to have hidden themselves at my entrance. I went to the first urinal in a row nearest to the sinks and started doing my business. A few seconds later, someone stepped up to the farthest urinal to my left. I was fairly attuned to the ambiance of the bathroom, or rather, the sounds of the nearby theaters, and hadn't heard anyone enter. Nevertheless, someone apparently did, and they were at the far end of the row. They somehow slipped right behind me. Something about their presence immediately unnerved me, and I hastened to finish what I had started. I didn't look directly at them, but glimpsed what I felt was a fairly normal appearance. A black jacket, jeans, and sneakers. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about them, and I almost had a very unfortunate and unimaginably painful accident as I hurriedly zipped up. Stepping away from the stall, I took a glance in their direction and saw them staring right at me. The bathroom was lit fairly brightly with several lights situated throughout the ceiling above both the urinals and the stalls, and of course above the sinks. There was little room for shadows, and yet the man's entire face was shaded. He had no hat, and his hair was short cut and parted at the forehead. His posture was relaxed, and yet the weirdly darkened face put me on edge, making me feel like he meant me harm in some way. I nervously laughed, unsure of what else to do, and stepped back, half turning toward the sinks, wanting to keep him in my peripheral vision. Casey suddenly charged at me. Even as I started washing my hands, he remained standing by the urinals, his face still hidden, veiled by some sourceless shadow. I looked away for a single second, maybe half a second, a habitual glance at my reflection to assure that there were no crumbs or crud on my face. Upon returning my gaze toward the man, I saw that he had somehow disappeared in that brief moment. Unfortunately, I saw him again now, reflected in the mirror, standing in front of the bathroom's exit, blocking it. Turning away from the sink with little alarms in my brain signaling off one by one, I struggled to keep myself under control, not yet certain that the stranger was serious in his confrontational or at least unsettling, provocative behavior. I was frightened, no doubt about that, but also angered. He was keeping me from my movie, for which I'd paid the steep IMAX prices. Finally, breaking the speechlessness of the moment, I asked what he was doing. He didn't respond, just kept staring at me with his face still unexplainably withheld from view. Had I not sensed something uniquely off about this man, I might have tried pushing him aside, but there was something so inexpressibly eerie about his presence, so fundamentally wrong. I decided to instead do something pretty ridiculous. I took out my phone and, with the camera's flash activated, took a picture of him. The plan was to threaten him with some sort of legal action if he didn't get out of my way, having the picture of him blocking the bathroom door as evidence of his arguably hostile behavior. The man didn't flinch at the camera's flash or make any moves or gestures to indicate that he had an issue with the picture, which I of course found unnerving. But what I found absolutely terrifying, what set me running for one of the stalls, was what I saw on my phone screen. In the picture, the man's face wasn't covered by darkness. Everything else was dark, and only a shockingly white face showed clearly. Its eyes were two leaking pools of black, which joined with the equally black mouth at the bottom of the chinless face. There was no nose, only those three portals of dripping, molten darkness. The almost lustrous ivory face seemed to float amidst the pitch-black background, a hovering, spectral visage of unwholesomeness. I locked myself in the middle stall, my usual preference under less terrifying circumstances, and crouched atop the toilet. Just then, the lights of the bathroom went out all at once. A soft noise arose, raspy, stuttered breathing, like that of some mummy newly arisen from its age-old tomb. A few breathless moments later, there was a sound to my right, at the first of the 5 stalls. I heard the sound of shattering porcelain and splashing water, which in the oddly acoustic confines sounded thunderous. Another second passed, and I heard the same sounds from the next stall, the one immediately to my right. At the destruction of that stall's toilet, I started to whimper, fearing for my life. Then, with a scream more horrific than anything I'd ever heard, the door of my stall nearly broke off its hinges as something crashed into it. 3 more screams rang out, each followed by a stall-shaking impact. Somehow, through the mercy of God or the architectural aptitude of the bathroom's designers, the stall door held. The screaming, assaulting horror eventually relented, moving on to inflict its insane violence against the other 2 remaining stalls. Their toilets were mercilessly smashed to bits. At the completion of the violence, the lights came back on. Despite this, I remained perched atop the toilet for at least 10 more minutes, listening for even the slightest sound of someone or something lurking beyond the stall. Finally, after saying a prayer or 2, I unlocked and opened my stall door and peered out into the bathroom. The floor was coated in water and littered with the shards of shattered toilets, but there was no one around. No man with his face obscured by shadows, no floating face. On my fear-weakened legs, I wobbled out of my stall, and at this moment, someone entered the bathroom. Someone plainly, wonderfully normal. They saw me leaning weakly against the counter of the sinks and saw the wreckage of the other toilets and said, "Did you have that chili cheese dog too? It's messing me up, man." I went home after that. I'll see the movie another time. If you find these stories chilling, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more gripping tales. Share your story in the comments below. I love to hear your experiences. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.